Welcome back. Take a deep breath, relax, and let the soothing whispers of this story guide you into a world of calm and mystery. The manor had been silent for years, its secrets buried deep within its walls. But then, late one night, a single page, hidden for centuries, slipped from an old book and fell onto the floor. What it revealed was more than just a clue. It was a key. And with that key, the truth of St. Eloise Manor began to unravel in ways no one could have imagined. But the question remains, who is watching, and what will they do when the final secret is revealed? Chapter 1. A Whisper in the Stacks. The evening was settling in, draping St. Eloise Manor in a soft golden glow that made the old stone walls look like ancient guardians of forgotten secrets. The air was cool, carrying with it the scent of old books, dust, and the unmistakable comfort of a well-lived-in home. Miss Marple, calm as ever, stepped through the large, ornate door of the manor's library, the creaking of the heavy oak almost like a soft whisper, as if even the door itself was reluctant to break the silence. It was a library of extraordinary size, its shelves lined with hundreds of books, their leather-bound covers gleaming in the fading light. The sound of the ticking grandfather clock in the far corner was the only noise that dared interrupt the quiet stillness. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her glasses, scanned the room. Each book seemed to have its own story to tell, but the library wasn't just a place for reading, it was a labyrinth of forgotten tales, hidden truths, and ancient mysteries. Miss Marple slowly walked between the shelves, her soft footsteps the only sound accompanying the stillness. She could feel the weight of history in the air. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and twitch, as if they were holding their breath, waiting for something. Just then, the silence was broken by the sound of a door creaking open. Miss Marple turned to see Eleanor Hawthorne standing at the entrance. Eleanor looked out of place in the grand library, her youthful face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something deeper, darker. Miss Marple. Eleanor's voice was quiet but urgent, as though she had been holding something back for far too long. She stepped into the room hesitantly, her gaze darting around as if expecting to find someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. "I need your help. I think something is happening in this library, something I can't explain." Miss Marple regarded her with a calm but intense look. "What seems to be troubling you, my dear?" Her voice was as soothing as the soft rustle of pages turning. Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, making sure no one else was listening. "It's the book," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "The one I found in the forbidden section. She hesitated. "I think it's more than just a book. There's something in it. Something dangerous." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not yet convinced. "Dangerous? Books are merely vessels for knowledge, Eleanor. What makes this one different?" Eleanor's eyes widened, her face pale as she spoke the next words. "It's as if the book is alive. I've been hearing things at night, whispers, moving pages, like someone is reading it in the dark. But when I check, no one is there. It's just the book. And now, I can't shake the feeling that it's trying to tell me something. A secret, a mystery, something hidden in these pages." Miss Marple's gaze softened. She didn't seem alarmed by Eleanor's words. Instead, there was a slight gleam of understanding in her eyes. "A secret, you say? Perhaps it is not the book that is strange, but the mystery it holds within." Eleanor nodded, her hands trembling as she gestured for Miss Marple to follow her deeper into the library. She led the way, passing row after row of books, each one silent but full of unspoken stories. Finally, they stopped before an old wooden shelf tucked in a shadowy corner. Eleanor reached up, her fingers brushing against a leather-bound book that seemed to have been left untouched for years. Its spine was cracked, and the gold lettering was almost illegible. "This is the one," Eleanor whispered. "I've never seen anything like it before. It wasn't even listed in the catalogue, and when I asked the librarian about it, he looked uncomfortable. He told me it wasn't meant to be read, but I couldn't resist." She pulled the book down with trembling hands, as if it were too heavy, too important to let go. Miss Marple took the book from her hands, her fingers gently tracing the worn leather. The air around them seemed to shift, and for a moment the soft ticking of the clock seemed to fade into the background. "I sense there is more to this book than meets the eye," Miss Marple murmured. She flipped the book open slowly, her eyes scanning the faded pages. The ink was faint, the writing elegant, but there was something unsettling about it, something ancient. Eleanor, standing beside her, looked at Miss Marple with wide eyes. "Do you feel it too? The weight of it? The sense that it's waiting?" Miss Marple closed the book gently and looked up at Eleanor. "The weight of knowledge," she said quietly. "Sometimes the answers we seek are not meant to be discovered all at once. But in time, we will understand what lies within." But as Miss Marple spoke, something shifted in the room. A low creak echoed from the far end of the library. It was as if the books themselves were stirring, a silent whisper travelling through the shelves. Miss Marple stood still, her eyes narrowing. "There's something more here, Eleanor. Something alive in these pages, and I suspect it is waiting for the right person to unlock it." Eleanor shuddered. "Do you think the book is cursed? Or is someone else trying to find it?" Miss Marple smiled, though there was an edge to her voice now, a sharpness that was always present beneath her calm demeanor. "My dear, I think the book is only a part of the mystery. There are many layers here, and like any good puzzle, it will take patience, understanding, and a little bit of courage to uncover the truth." As Miss Marple spoke, the air seemed to grow even colder, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen. The library, once so comforting and serene, now felt like a place where secrets were hidden just out of reach, waiting to be found by those brave enough to seek them. The mystery of the Enchanted Library had begun. Chapter 2. The First Clue. The following morning brought with it a delicate mist that clung to the windows of St. Eloise Manor, shrouding the estate in a soft, almost dreamlike haze. Inside the grand library, Miss Marple sat in her favourite armchair, a well-worn piece of furniture nestled in the far corner near the window. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers intertwined, and though the world outside seemed to pause under the weight of the fog, Miss Marple's mind was anything but still. Eleanor had left for a moment, her nerves still unsettled by the strange happenings, but Miss Marple remained. She had a quiet, steadfast confidence in her own thoughts. This book, this mysterious book, was a puzzle, and Miss Marple was patient. She had learned long ago that all secrets, no matter how deeply buried, would eventually reveal themselves. Sometimes they just needed the right time to be uncovered. The clock ticked on, each passing second filling the library with a soft rhythm, like the heartbeat of the house itself. The only other sounds were the occasional rustle of pages turning as Miss Marple gently flipped through the book Eleanor had brought her. The faint ink markings danced before her eyes, their faded strokes nearly invisible but still discernible, a language both ancient and unsettling. As she slowly examined the words, Miss Marple's gaze caught on something odd. A set of faint scribbles, barely visible between the lines of text. They weren't part of the main text, but rather scrawled in the margins. They looked like hastily written notes, as if someone had been interrupted in the middle of writing them down. The handwriting was slightly different from the main text, more frantic and almost disjointed. Miss Marple leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing. She ran her fingers lightly over the page, brushing away a thin layer of dust. The key lies in the words, not the door. A secret sealed within ink, waiting to be understood. Her voice was barely a whisper as she read aloud the first line, savouring the weight of each word. A secret sealed within ink, waiting to be understood. The words felt strange, almost heavy, as though they carried more meaning than they appeared to on the surface. It was as though the book was speaking to her, waiting for her to understand it. How very cryptic, she mused, her voice smooth and gentle, as if contemplating a riddle. The room, bathed in a soft light from the morning sun, seemed to grow quieter still. She could feel the weight of the book in her hands, as if it was quietly urging her to continue. But it was the next part that sent a shiver down Miss Marple's spine. Just below the cryptic sentence was a line that had been underlined twice in thick, inked strokes. The pattern is hidden in the pages. Search for the code that binds them. Miss Marple's heart beat a little faster now, the calm of the morning momentarily disturbed by the weight of these words. The pattern is hidden in the pages, she murmured to herself, her mind already working. What pattern? And how could it be hidden? She turned the page gently, careful not to disturb the fragile paper any further. And there it was. Another clue. This time it wasn't a message in the margins, but something more tangible. A small folded piece of paper was tucked between the pages, so carefully hidden that it had gone unnoticed during their earlier examination. The paper was yellowed, and the edges were crinkled, as though it had been in hiding for decades. With a steady hand, Miss Marple unfolded the paper. It was a small map of sorts, drawn with faint, delicate lines. The map depicted the layout of St. Eloise Manor, a familiar place, but this map was different. At first glance it seemed like any other blueprint, but as Miss Marple's eyes followed the lines, she saw something strange. The library was circled in ink, and there, etched beside it, was a symbol, a series of interlocking lines, almost like a cross, but with one side longer than the other. Miss Marple's fingers hovered over the symbol, feeling the faintest of impressions beneath the paper's surface. It was as if the ink had been carefully pressed into the map, deliberately marking something important. "Ah," Miss Marple whispered, her voice tinged with the quiet satisfaction of discovery. "This, I believe, is the pattern we are meant to find." Her mind began to piece things together. The message had spoken of a pattern, and now in her hands was the pattern, a map drawn with intention, containing clues waiting to be uncovered. The secret wasn't just in the pages, as the book had said. It was in the very structure of the manor itself. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant as she let the realization settle over her. The library. But what is the code that binds them? She muttered to herself. Her mind flickered over the clues, each one leading her deeper into a maze of hidden truths. It was then that Eleanor returned, her footsteps hesitant as she entered the library. "Miss Marple, did you find anything?" Miss Marple looked up, her expression serene but sharp, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "Yes, Eleanor. I believe we have found the first clue, and it is far more intriguing than we first imagined." Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes wide with anticipation. "What does it mean?" Miss Marple folded the map carefully and placed it on the table. "It means," she said softly, "that we have unlocked the first door to this mystery. But the door is not a physical one, my dear. The key lies within the structure of the manor itself, and to find it, we must follow the pattern." Chapter 3. The Forgotten Journal. The day had settled into an almost oppressive stillness as Miss Marple sat at the large wooden desk in the library, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon light. The quietness of the manor was only broken by the occasional rustle of pages, the ticking of the grandfather clock, and the low hum of the distant wind brushing against the windows. Everything seemed to be in its place, yet there was an undeniable sense that something was lurking just out of reach, waiting to be uncovered. Eleanor, who had been pacing anxiously since the discovery of the map, was seated at a nearby table, her eyes darting from one book to another, searching for some hidden meaning. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating, as they continued to dig deeper into the library's secrets. But it was Miss Marple who seemed unaffected by the mounting mystery, her expression serene and contemplative as she turned another page in the ancient book they had uncovered. It was then, as she flipped through the brittle pages with the utmost care, that her eyes caught on something. A small, almost imperceptible slip of paper wedged between the pages. It wasn't a map this time, nor was it a cryptic message written in the margins. Instead, it was an old journal entry, the ink faded and the handwriting hurried, as though the writer had been in a great rush. The paper was frayed at the edges, and the smell of age clung to it, like a forgotten memory. With a quiet murmur, Miss Marple carefully unfolded the paper. As she did, the handwriting became clearer, the words more distinct, though still tinged with an air of urgency. "I have hidden the key in the most unlikely of places. They will never find it. The library holds many secrets, but none as important as the one I have concealed. The door will open only to those who understand the pattern." Miss Marple's fingers lingered on the paper for a moment, her gaze fixed on the words. There was something about them, a sense of finality, as though the writer had known that this secret would be uncovered one day, perhaps not by them, but by someone else. Someone like Miss Marple, who was patient enough to see the hidden patterns in the world. "Another clue," Miss Marple murmured, her voice soft, almost as if speaking to herself. She glanced over at Eleanor, who had been watching her with wide eyes. "And yet, this journal feels different. It's almost as if the writer knew exactly what was coming." Eleanor, her brow furrowed in confusion, leaned forward. "But what does it mean, Miss Marple? The key. What key? And why does the library hold such a secret?" Miss Marple didn't answer immediately. Instead, she carefully placed the journal back on the table and allowed her fingers to trace the faded edges of the paper. "There is much we still do not understand, Eleanor. But the journal, the words are clear enough. The key lies in the library, but not in the obvious places." She paused, for a moment, the weight of the words settling over her. "And the door?" It will only open to those who can decipher the pattern. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly, the air growing colder, the shadows deeper. It was as if the very walls of the library were listening, waiting for the next step. Miss Marple turned to the map they had found earlier, its lines still fresh in her mind. The interlocking lines, the strange symbol beside the library's marked location, the pattern. It all pointed to one thing. The library held the key, but not in a way that was immediately obvious. Eleanor shifted in her seat, her voice barely a whisper. Do you think the key is a physical object, Miss Marple? Or is it something more abstract? Miss Marple smiled softly, the kind of smile that suggested she was already several steps ahead in her thinking. I believe it is both, my dear. A physical object, yes, but also a concept. A truth that can only be revealed through understanding, not just by seeing. She stood up slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. Her gaze moved across the room, scanning the shelves once more. It was as if the very books were beckoning her, urging her to look more closely, to look beyond their simple covers. Suddenly she stopped. Her eyes locked onto a particular shelf, one near the far corner of the library. It wasn't the largest shelf, nor was it the most adorned, but something about it caught her attention. The books there were thick and heavy, their spines worn with age. But it wasn't the books themselves that intrigued her. It was the way the shelf was positioned, as though it were hiding something. A slight, almost imperceptible gap between the shelves, just wide enough to suggest that something was concealed behind them. Miss Marple moved toward the shelf with the same deliberate calm she always maintained, her steps soft and measured. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, gently pulling one after another, as though testing their weight. The more she moved, the more she felt that familiar, unmistakable sensation, the feeling that she was on the verge of something significant. Look here, Miss Marple said quietly, pointing to the small gap in the shelves. It's subtle, but it's there. Something is hidden behind these books, something that's been waiting. Eleanor joined her, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. Do you think it's the key? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Miss Marple smiled again, that quiet, knowing smile. Only one way to find out. With a swift motion, Miss Marple moved a few of the larger books aside, revealing a small, inconspicuous box nestled between the shelves. It was made of dark wood, aged and worn, but unmistakably out of place. The box was locked, its intricate metal clasp glinting in the dim light. Eleanor gasped. Do you think this is it? The key? Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes narrowing as she examined the lock. It wasn't like any lock she had seen before. It was delicate, almost fragile, and yet it had been designed with such precision. There were no keyholes, no obvious mechanism to open it. Instead, it was as though it required a specific motion, a specific understanding, to release its secret. Yes, Miss Marple whispered, more to herself than to Eleanor. This is part of it. I'm sure of it. But the pattern, the code we've been searching for, it must be in the way we approach this box. Chapter 4. The Hidden Room. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of St. Eloise Manor, casting a soft golden glow over the library. The silence was thick, almost suffocating in its stillness, broken only by the faint rustle of pages and the occasional murmur from Miss Marple as she pondered the clues. Eleanor had left the room earlier, her nerves frayed by the mounting mystery, but Miss Marple remained, ever patient, ever steady. She knew that the key to this puzzle was close, perhaps closer than even Eleanor realized. The map they had discovered the previous day, carefully etched with lines and a peculiar symbol, was spread out on the table before her. Miss Marple had spent hours studying it, her sharp eyes tracing every line, every curve. The library was circled, marked as the heart of this enigma, but it was the symbol beside the library's location that held her attention. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, etched into the map as though to remind her, this is where the answer lies. The sound of footsteps approaching broke Miss Marple's reverie, and she looked up to see Eleanor standing in the doorway, her face pale and troubled. "Miss Marple," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly, "I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched. I hear things at night, faint whispers, moving books, and when I check, there's nothing there. It's as though the library is alive, hiding something." Miss Marple's gaze softened, the lines of her face relaxing into an expression of quiet understanding. "I do not doubt you, Eleanor. But sometimes the presence we feel in a place is not a person, but a history, waiting to be revealed." She stood up, folding the map carefully and tucking it into her pocket. "I believe we are very close to uncovering something that has been hidden here for a long time." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You think the library is hiding something? A secret room, perhaps?" Miss Marple smiled, the corners of her lips lifting slightly. "Indeed I do. But it is not the room we must find first, my dear. It is the pattern, the code hidden in plain sight, and to find it, we must search the library, not as we normally would, but with the understanding that some doors open only when approached with the right key." Eleanor's confusion deepened, but she said nothing. She had learned by now that Miss Marple's method was not to explain everything at once. Instead, she allowed the mystery to unfold naturally, like a flower blooming in its own time. The two women spent the next several hours carefully searching every corner of the library, moving through the rows of books with an almost reverent air. Miss Marple's movements were deliberate, each step taken with purpose. She ran her fingers lightly along the spines of the books, pausing at times to pull one from the shelf, inspecting its contents with an uncanny sense of intuition. Eleanor, though still unsettled by the strange occurrences in the manor, followed her lead, determined to uncover the truth. But it wasn't until they reached the farthest corner of the library, an area that seemed, for all its grandeur, almost neglected, that Miss Marple paused, her sharp eyes narrowing as she studied the shelves. "Look here, Eleanor," she said quietly. "Do you notice anything unusual about this particular section?" Eleanor followed Miss Marple's gaze, but all she could see were rows of books, stacked neatly in place. Everything seemed ordinary enough. The shelves were lined with volumes of history, philosophy, and old classics. Yet something about this section felt off. The books appeared slightly too uniform, as if arranged with a specific intention. Miss Marple took a step forward, her fingers lightly brushing the wood of the shelves. "There's something here," she murmured, "but it's subtle." She examined the shelf closely, her eyes darting from one book to the next. Her hand hovered over a thick old volume titled The History of St. Eloise Manor. But before she could pull it from the shelf, something caught her attention. A slight gap between two of the books, so small it was almost imperceptible, but just large enough to suggest that something had been hidden behind it. With a knowing look, Miss Marple gently tugged at the books, one by one, until she revealed the narrow opening between the shelves. The air in the space beyond felt different, cooler, heavier. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with recognition. "I believe this is the door we've been searching for," she said, her voice calm and steady, like the stillness before a storm. Eleanor stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. A hidden door? But how? Miss Marple motioned for her to step back, her mind already working through the details. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the map they had discovered earlier. With a deliberate gesture, she held it up, pointing to the symbol near the library's location. The lines of the symbol seemed to match perfectly with the edges of the hidden door. It was as if the map itself had been drawn to lead them here. "The key was always here," Miss Marple murmured, "not in a book, but in the very structure of the manor. The symbol is not just a clue, it is the pattern that guides us." With a steady hand, Miss Marple pushed gently against the shelves, and to Eleanor's astonishment, they began to move, sliding open with a soft creak. The space beyond was dark, the air thick with dust, as though it had not been disturbed in decades. Miss Marple stepped into the darkness, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. "Come, Eleanor," she said softly, her voice the only sound in the otherwise silent room. "The mystery lies ahead." Eleanor hesitated, but then followed, her heart pounding in her chest. The atmosphere was thick with suspense now, each step taking them closer to the unknown. As Miss Marple led the way down the narrow passage, her mind raced, piecing together the clues they had uncovered. The library, the symbol, the hidden room. It was all falling into place. But what lay beyond this door? What secret had been buried here, waiting for someone brave enough to find it? The passage they walked through was narrow and dimly lit, the walls closing in as if the manor itself were trying to keep its secrets hidden. The air grew cooler with each step, the silence deafening except for the soft echo of their footsteps. At the end of the passage, Miss Marple stopped in front of a wooden door. It was old, its surface worn and weathered by time, but it was unmistakably different from the rest of the doors in the manor. There was something about it, a sense of finality, as though this was the threshold that separated the past from the present. With a soft sigh, Miss Marple reached for the door handle, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. The moment her hand touched it, a strange sensation washed over her like a ripple through time, a feeling that she was about to uncover something that would change everything. She turned the handle slowly, and as the door creaked open, a wave of cold air rushed out from within. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, but Miss Marple could sense the weight of the past pressing down on them. She stepped forward, and Eleanor followed, their footsteps barely audible in the vast emptiness. Chapter 5. The Locked Secret. The evening had arrived quietly at St. Eloise Manor, with the fading light of the day casting long golden shadows across the library's grand room. The atmosphere was calm, but beneath the serenity, the tension was palpable. Miss Marple and Eleanor stood in front of the ancient door they had discovered behind the hidden shelves. The door, now fully opened, revealed a narrow, darkened corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, swallowing any light that tried to penetrate it. The stillness was unsettling. It was as though the manor itself had paused in anticipation of their next move. The faint sound of a distant clock ticking echoed through the passage, marking time as they stood there, poised on the edge of something ancient, something important. Eleanor's breath quickened, and her grip on the lantern she held tightened. The faint light from the lantern cast eerie, dancing shadows on the walls of the narrow corridor, heightening the sense of mystery and suspense. Miss Marple, however, remained calm. Her eyes, as sharp as ever, scanned the darkness with quiet determination. She had no fear, only an unshakable confidence that the answers they sought were just within reach. "Shall we?" Miss Marple's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of quiet authority. There was no rush in her words, no sense of urgency, just the calm assurance that whatever lay ahead, it would be revealed in due time. Eleanor nodded, her voice a mere whisper. "What do you think is behind that door, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple paused, her fingers gently brushing the door frame as she glanced back at Eleanor. "I believe it is not just a room we are about to enter, but a final piece of the puzzle, a piece that will give us the answers we have been seeking." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight of understanding that made Eleanor's heart race. They stepped into the corridor, the door creaking closed behind them with a soft thud. The passage was narrow, with stone walls that seemed to breathe with age, and the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of old wood. The faint flicker of the lantern's flame cast long shadows that seemed to stretch and sway with their movements, as though the very darkness was alive. Miss Marple moved with deliberate calm, each step taken with purpose, her eyes flicking from one detail to another, absorbing the subtle hints that the corridor held. She reached out, her fingers grazing along the wall, and after a few moments, she stopped, her eyes narrowing as she studied a small indentation in the stone. "This is it," Miss Marple murmured, her voice almost reverent. She gently pressed her palm against the indentation, and to Eleanor's surprise the stone shifted slightly, revealing a small hidden compartment. Eleanor gasped, stepping forward. "A secret compartment?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "But what could be inside?" Miss Marple didn't answer immediately. She carefully reached into the compartment, her fingers brushing against something cold and smooth. She pulled out a small, intricately carved box. It was delicate, its surface covered with ancient symbols and patterns that Miss Marple could only partially recognize. The box seemed to hum with an unspoken energy, as though it had been waiting for centuries to be discovered. "This," Miss Marple said, turning the box over in her hands, "is not just any box. It is the key to the mystery, I believe." "But how do we open it?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. Miss Marple held the box in her hands, examining it carefully. "There's always a pattern, Eleanor," she said, her voice steady and calm. "We just have to find it." As the two of them stood in the dim light of the corridor, a deep silence settled around them. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing colder, thicker, as if the manor itself were holding its breath. The only sound was the gentle clinking of the box in Miss Marple's hands, as if it were whispering its secrets to her. Miss Marple turned the box over once more, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols carved into its surface. Each symbol seemed familiar, like something from a forgotten dream, and as she moved her fingers along the carvings, she suddenly stopped, her eyes widening slightly. "Aha," she said almost to herself. "I see it now." Eleanor watched her with wide eyes, her breath shallow with anticipation. "What is it, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple's voice was quiet but certain. "The pattern," she said, her fingers hovering over the symbols. "The pattern is the key, but to unlock it, we must apply the right touch." Eleanor felt a chill run down
her spine as Miss Marple's fingers lingered over the symbols. The box seemed to pulse in her hands, the ancient carvings almost alive in the lantern light. It was as though the box was responding to Miss Marple's touch, revealing the secret it had held for so long. With a deep breath, Miss Marple pressed down on one of the symbols, and there was a soft click. The box opened with an almost imperceptible creak, revealing what lay inside. But as Miss Marple gazed into the box, her expression faltered for a brief moment. Inside was not the expected treasure or hidden documents. Instead, there was a single delicate key, a key unlike any Eleanor had ever seen. It was made of silver, its design intricate and almost otherworldly. The key glowed faintly, its edges sharp and elegant, as if it held power beyond the ordinary. Miss Marple lifted the key carefully, her eyes filled with quiet recognition. "This," she said softly, "is the key we have been searching for." "But a key?" Eleanor's voice was filled with confusion. "What does it open?" Miss Marple turned the key over in her hands, her mind racing with possibilities. "This key," she murmured, "opens the door we've been looking for all along. The final secret." Eleanor's heart raced. "The
secret of the manor." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gleaming with understanding. "The secret that has been hidden in plain sight. The final piece of the puzzle." But just as she said those words, the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop. A low, eerie sound echoed through the passage, like the creaking of wood or the shifting of ancient stones. It was as though the very walls of the manor were waking up, responding to the key, to the secret that had been uncovered. A low rumble reverberated through the stone floor beneath their feet, and Eleanor froze, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple's face remained calm, but her eyes were sharp with realization. "I believe," she said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of a deep understanding. "We have just triggered something we cannot yet fully comprehend. The door is opening, Eleanor, and whatever lies beyond it, we must face it together." Chapter 6. The Whispering Shadows. The evening sun had long since set, and St. Eloise Manor lay cloaked in darkness. The once welcoming warmth of the day had faded, leaving the manor with an almost haunting chill. Inside the library, the only light came from the soft glow of a single lantern Miss Marple held in her steady hands. Eleanor, who had grown more nervous with each passing hour, clung to the lantern's flickering light, her gaze darting anxiously to every shadow that flickered and danced along the walls. The manor was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. They had just unlocked the mysterious key from the hidden box, and though its presence was undeniable, its purpose was still unclear. The air felt heavy, as though the entire house had been holding its secrets back for centuries and was now ready to release them, one piece at a time. Miss Marple stood still, her gaze fixed on the narrow, darkened hallway that stretched before them. The moment the box had opened, the temperature had dropped noticeably, and a strange rumbling had reverberated through the stone floor beneath their feet. It was a sensation that seemed to resonate with the very bones of the manor, as if the walls themselves were alive, listening to their every movement. Eleanor shivered, her heart beating faster. "Miss Marple, I don't like this. It feels wrong, like something's watching us." Miss Marple turned to her, her face serene but her eyes sharp. "You are not wrong, Eleanor. Something is watching, but it is not what you think. The manor has always watched. It keeps its secrets close, waiting for the right person to unlock them. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, and her pulse quickened. The very air around them seemed charged, as though the walls of the library were alive with anticipation. Miss Marple did not speak again. Instead, she moved forward with her usual calm and measured pace, her lantern casting long shadows along the stone floor. They moved deeper into the corridor, Miss Marple leading the way with a quiet certainty that Eleanor could not help but admire, even as her own unease grew. The deeper they went, the darker and colder the passage became. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock somewhere in the distance. Every step they took echoed through the passage, the sound unnervingly loud in the otherwise silent darkness. Suddenly, a sound broke the stillness, a soft whisper, like a breath against the back of their necks. It was so faint at first that Eleanor wondered if she had imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. A hushed murmur, indistinguishable but unmistakably there. Miss Marple stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing. She stood still for a moment, listening intently, and Eleanor, though terrified, found herself doing the same. The whisper came again, clearer now, though still too soft to understand. "It's coming from ahead," Miss Marple whispered, her voice steady but tinged with the faintest note of something more, something older, more knowing. "The manor itself seems to be speaking to us." Eleanor felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. The whisper grew louder, almost urgent, as if the walls of the manor were calling out to them. Miss Marple, unfazed, moved forward again, her footsteps slow but resolute. Eleanor followed, though her heart hammered in her chest. As they approached the end of the narrow corridor, Miss Marple stopped once more, raising a hand to signal for silence. The whisper had intensified, becoming a murmur of indistinct voices all around them. It was as though the house itself had come alive with 1,000 secrets, each one desperate to be heard. There, in the shadows ahead, Miss Marple's lantern light fell upon something, a faint outline in the darkness, something that didn't belong. The stone wall ahead appeared slightly different, a faint seam running along its length barely visible, yet it was unmistakable. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "What is it?" she asked in a trembling voice. Miss Marple raised the lantern higher, her eyes gleaming with quiet understanding. "A door, Eleanor. A door that has been waiting for us." The stone wall before them was not solid after all. It had been a hidden door all along, cleverly disguised to blend into the surrounding stone. The seam was so faint that it was nearly invisible to the untrained eye, but to Miss Marple it was as obvious as the rising of the sun. She stepped forward and placed a hand against the wall, her fingers brushing the cold stone. There was a slight resistance, as though the door were reluctant to open, but after a moment, the stone shifted with a low, grinding sound. Slowly it began to slide open, revealing a hidden room beyond. Eleanor gasped as the door creaked open, the musty air from the hidden room spilling out like a forgotten memory. Miss Marple, unfazed by the chill that washed over her, stepped into the darkened room, her lantern lighting the way. The room was small, cluttered with dust and cobwebs, but the air was thick with the weight of something old, something that had been concealed for far too long. In the center of the room, on a pedestal, sat a small, ancient chest, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the lantern's light.
Miss Marple approached the chest slowly, her eyes scanning the carvings. They were not just decorative, they were symbols, each one a puzzle piece that had been placed there with deliberate care. Miss Marple's fingers hovered over the chest, her mind racing as she recognized the pattern. "This chest," she said softly, "is the final piece of the puzzle. The pattern, Eleanor. It was here all along." Eleanor stood frozen at the entrance to the room, her pulse racing as she watched Miss Marple gently lift the chest from its pedestal. The faintest sound of a creaking hinge
echoed in the air, and the room seemed to grow colder still, as though the chest itself was holding its breath. Miss Marple slowly opened the chest, her hands steady, and inside, there, nestled among the dust and cobwebs, was an old, weathered book. The cover was faded, its pages yellowed with age, but there was something unmistakably significant about it. It was not the book they had been searching for, but it was, in a way, the culmination of everything that had come before. Miss Marple lifted the book carefully, her eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. "This, Eleanor," she said, her voice low, almost reverent, "is the key. The book we have been searching for all along." But as she held it, a strange sound filled the room. It was a soft rustling, as if the walls themselves were shifting, closing in. And then, for just a moment, the whispering voices grew louder, urgent, almost frantic. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. "Miss Marple, what is happening? What is this book?" Miss Marple's gaze never left the book as she held it in her hands. "The answer," she said softly, "lies within these pages. But the manor is restless, Eleanor. It is alive with the memories of its past, and it will not let its secrets go easily." The whispering grew louder still, surrounding them, as if the very walls of the room were alive, desperate to hold on to their secrets. And as Miss Marple opened the book, the shadows around them seemed to deepen, the very air thick with anticipation. Something ancient was about to be revealed, and though Eleanor was terrified, she could not look away. Chapter 7. The Final Key. The cold night wrapped around St. Eloise Manor like a blanket of stillness. The deep silence of the house pressed down on the two women as they stood in the secret room, the air thick with the weight of everything that had come before. Miss Marple, as calm as always, held the ancient book in her hands, the soft flickering of the lantern casting its shadow across her features. The room felt alive with the mystery they had uncovered, and yet, for all its power, it remained just as silent, as if waiting for the right moment to reveal its deepest secrets. Eleanor stood slightly behind her, still reeling from the discovery. Her heart was beating faster, the quiet intensity of the moment almost too much to bear. The whispers that had followed them down the corridor had intensified when they reached the chest. But now, in the presence of the book, they had gone quiet. The stillness in the room was almost suffocating, yet Miss Marple seemed utterly unfazed. She stood there, examining the book, her mind already working through its mysteries. Miss Marple turned the book over in her hands, her fingers brushing against the worn cover. There was something about the way the light flickered on its surface, something that made the book feel almost alive. Eleanor couldn't shake the sense that they had crossed some invisible threshold. And now, there was no turning back. "What do you think it is, Miss Marple?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. She knew the question had been hanging in the air since they first opened the chest, but now, with the book in their hands, it felt heavier than ever. Miss Marple smiled, a small, knowing smile that always seemed to come just before she revealed the answer to a mystery. The book holds more than just words, Eleanor. It holds a key, not just a physical one, but a symbolic one. The key to understanding everything that has come before. She paused, her eyes meeting Eleanor's with quiet intensity. And it is not just the answer we've been searching for. It's the answer to the very nature of the manor itself. Eleanor's mind whirled. The nature of the manor. Yes, Miss Marple replied softly, her eyes drifting back to the pages of the book. This house, this place, it has secrets, and it has kept them hidden for a long time. But all secrets can be uncovered if you know how to listen. She turned the book over in her hands again, her fingers grazing the ancient text, and then she slowly opened the first page. The words on the page were faint, nearly illegible in the dim light. But Miss Marple's eyes moved quickly across them, absorbing each detail as if they were her own thoughts. Eleanor could see the concentration on Miss Marple's face, the subtle change in her expression that meant she was unlocking something important. And then, with a soft, satisfied sigh, Miss Marple stopped. She had found what she was looking for. The key, Miss Marple said, her voice low but certain. The key to understanding everything is not in the words, but in the pattern that they form. And this, she said, holding up the open book, this is the key. Eleanor leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. The key to what, Miss Marple? To the hidden room, Miss Marple replied with a quiet certainty. The room that lies beyond the manor's secrets. It is not simply a room. It is a door to the past, to everything the manor has been concealing. And this book, she tapped the page gently, shows us the way. Miss Marple's fingers traced a set of symbols on the page, symbols that seemed to mirror those they had seen throughout the manor, on the walls, on the map, on the chest. As her fingers moved across the page, Eleanor's heart began to race. It was as if the manor itself was responding to Miss Marple's touch. The air felt charged, the walls almost pulsing with a life of their own. The symbols were starting to make sense. They were not just markings, they were a map, a guide to the hidden room, to the final secret. Miss Marple's hand hovered over one of the symbols, and as she did, Eleanor could feel the temperature in the room drop, the faintest chill sweeping over them. "It's time," Miss Marple whispered. Eleanor could barely breathe. "Time for what?" "The pattern is complete," Miss Marple said, her voice as steady as ever. "It's time to unlock the final secret of the manor." Miss Marple stood up, and Eleanor followed her as she moved toward the far wall of the hidden room. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. The whispers that had followed them all this time seemed to fade into the background, and the air was filled with the sound of their footsteps echoing through the otherwise silent space. The wall in front of them was solid, stone, just like the rest of the manor. But as Miss Marple approached, she paused, her hand resting on the cold stone. Eleanor could feel the tension building in the room, the silence stretching until it was almost unbearable. "This is it," Miss Marple murmured. She placed her hand on a small indentation in the wall, one that hadn't been visible before, and slowly, with a soft click, the stone shifted. The wall before them began to open, revealing a narrow passageway, dimly lit by a faint light that seemed to come from nowhere. The air in the passage was thick, heavy with the weight of years of secrets and forgotten memories. Eleanor gasped, stepping back slightly. "Is this it?" Miss Marple nodded. The door has been waiting for us to find it, Eleanor. The key we've been searching for was not a physical key at all. It was a pattern, a story waiting to be told. And now that the story is complete, the door is opening. The passageway was narrow and dark, and as Miss Marple stepped forward, Eleanor followed, her heart racing in her chest. The walls seemed to close in around them as they walked, the air growing colder with each step. They moved deeper into the passage, the lantern's light flickering, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the soft sound of their footsteps. And then, ahead of them, there was a faint glow, a soft golden light that seemed to beckon them forward. Miss Marple's pace did not falter. She moved with the same quiet, assured grace that had marked their entire journey. Eleanor, though nervous, felt a sense of calm settle over her in Miss Marple's presence. The older woman had seen this before, knew exactly what to do. As they rounded the final corner of the passage, they arrived at a small circular room, bathed in a soft golden light. In the centre of the room stood a pedestal, and on it lay an object that glowed faintly. Miss Marple approached the pedestal slowly, her eyes narrowing. "This," she said softly, "is what the manor has been hiding." Chapter 8. The final revelation. The deep shadows of the night had settled across St. Eloise Manor, the manor now a silent, brooding figure in the darkness. Inside, the secret room lay still, the golden glow that had filled the hidden passageway now dimming, replaced by the flickering light of Miss Marple's lantern. The soft creak of the manor settling, the distant sound of wind sweeping through the trees outside. Everything felt suspended in time. And yet, beneath the calm exterior, something enormous was unfolding. Miss Marple stood at the centre of the circular room, her steady hands resting lightly on the edge of the pedestal that held the glowing object. Eleanor, her heart racing with anticipation, stood just behind her, the weight of everything they had discovered weighing heavily on her chest. The book, the whispers, the hidden passages, they had all led them here, to this moment. And still, Eleanor could feel something larger, more powerful, more alive in the air around them. The object on the pedestal was a small, intricately carved box, its surface catching the faint light and glimmering with an ancient radiance. It was a box, but not just any box. It was the culmination of everything they had learned. It was the final piece of the puzzle, and it beckoned them closer, as if calling them forward to reveal its secret. Miss Marple's fingers hovered over the box, her gaze focused, as though she were listening to the very walls of the room. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "What is it, Miss Marple?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Miss Marple's response was quiet, almost contemplative. "This box, Eleanor, is not merely a vessel. It holds the truth that has been locked away in this manor for centuries." Eleanor looked at the box in awe. The truth. But what truth? The manor's secrets, the mystery we've been unravelling. Miss Marple's gaze softened, and she turned to face Eleanor, her eyes shining with quiet wisdom. "Yes, but more than that, Eleanor. This box holds the story of St. Eloise Manor, the story that no one has been able to tell until now." For a moment, Eleanor felt the weight of Miss Marple's words settle over her. The story that had been hidden, locked away, and forgotten. It was a history, but also something more, a mystery that tied everything together. The manor, the book, the symbols, the whispers. It was all leading to this moment. With a soft sigh, Miss Marple placed her hand over the box and gently opened it.
As the lid of the box creaked open, a soft, ethereal light spilled from within, casting strange, shifting shadows across the walls. The air around them seemed to pulse with energy, and Eleanor could feel her heart beating faster, her skin tingling. It was as though the box had unlocked something deep within the house, something that had been waiting to be released. Inside the box was a single folded parchment. It was old, the
paper fragile and yellowed with age, but the markings on it were unmistakable. Eleanor's breath caught in her chest as Miss Marple carefully unfolded the parchment, revealing a detailed drawing. It was a map, but not just any map. This was a map of St. Eloise Manor, but it was different from the one they had seen earlier. This one was more intricate, more detailed, and at the center of the map, in bold, unmistakable strokes, was a symbol, the same symbol that had appeared on the walls, in the book, on the chest, and even in the secret passage, the symbol that had been the key all along. Miss Marple's fingers traced the lines of the symbol, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "This," she murmured, "this symbol is the key to understanding the true history of the manor." Eleanor stepped closer, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "But what does it mean, Miss Marple? What is this symbol? Why is it everywhere?" Miss Marple turned to her, her expression calm but filled with understanding. "This symbol, Eleanor, is not just a mark or a design. It is the seal of St. Eloise Manor. It is the secret that has been passed down through generations, a secret that has been protected, hidden for centuries." Eleanor's mind was spinning. The manor has a secret, a generational secret. Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, Eleanor. The manor was built not just as a home, but as a keeper of this secret. The symbol is a key that unlocks the truth behind everything that has happened here." As Miss Marple continued to explain, Eleanor could feel the tension building, wrapping around them like an invisible thread. The air in the room had become thick with anticipation, and the faint whispering, the same whispers that had haunted them from the beginning, seemed to grow louder. It was as though the manor itself was beginning to breathe again, its walls shifting with the weight of all that had been concealed. Miss Marple turned to Eleanor, her face filled with quiet resolution. "The key is not in finding a hidden room or unlocking a box, Eleanor. The key is understanding why this secret was kept hidden, and the answer lies in this map, this symbol." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. The realization was beginning to dawn on her, slow and steady. "It's not just about the manor," she whispered, her voice thick with awe. "It's about the people, the history, the lives that were shaped by it." Miss Marple gave her a small, knowing smile. "Exactly. The manor's secret was never meant to be a physical object. It was the story of those who lived here, their lives, their choices, their legacy. This symbol," she gestured to the map, "was the way the secret was kept safe. And now, it is time to unlock it, to tell the story." The room seemed to grow quieter still. The whispers that had been growing louder now faded into a soft murmur, like the distant hum of forgotten voices. The tension in the air lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. Understanding. The manor had revealed its secret, and with it, its history. Eleanor stood still, her mind racing to piece everything together. "So, what now? What happens next?" Miss Marple closed the book gently, her expression serene. "Now, we tell the story, Eleanor. The story of St. Eloise Manor. The story of the lives that were shaped by it, and the story that has been hidden, waiting for someone to uncover it. She paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. And perhaps, Eleanor, it is time for the manor to let go of its secrets. Time for it to rest. Chapter 9. The library's legacy. The first light of dawn was beginning to seep through the tall windows of St. Eloise Manor, casting long beams of pale sunlight across the room. The air in the library was heavy with the scent of old books, dust, and something else. Something more ancient, like the whispered breath of time itself. Miss Marple stood near the grand hearth, a soft crackling fire providing the only warmth in the room. Her hands rested lightly on the back of an old armchair, her eyes fixed on the row of bookshelves that stretched before her. The book they had uncovered, now placed carefully on the desk, seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. The answers had been found, yes. But Miss Marple knew that this moment was not just about discovery. It was about understanding, about piecing together the legacy of the manor, the lives it had shaped, and the mysteries that had been buried within its walls for so long. Eleanor, who had been standing quietly by the desk, was still processing everything that had transpired. The manor's secret, revealed at last, was not just about hidden rooms or forgotten treasures. It was about the people who had lived here, their choices, their ambitions, their fears, and how those had left their mark on the very walls of the house. The history they had uncovered was more than a simple tale of hidden things. It was the legacy of St. Eloise Manor itself. Miss Marple turned to Eleanor, her expression calm but filled with a quiet intensity. The story is complete, Eleanor, but the legacy remains. Eleanor took a slow, steady breath. The legacy of the manor. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on the open pages of the book. Yes, the legacy is not just in the secrets, but in the choices made by those who lived here. The people who shaped this place, who shaped the very fabric of its history. They are gone now, but their legacy lives on in the walls of this manor, in the stories that remain untold. And now, it is time for those stories to be shared. The weight of Miss Marple's words settled heavily on Eleanor's shoulders. But how do we share it, Miss Marple? We've uncovered everything, the book, the secret room, the symbol, but it still feels unfinished. Miss Marple turned back to the desk and slowly, deliberately closed the book. Some stories are never truly finished, Eleanor. They live on, carried by those who remember them. The secret of St. Eloise Manor has been locked away for centuries, but now it is time for it to be told. Not just to you or to me, but to anyone who is willing to listen. The room grew quieter as the morning light continued to flood the space, casting a soft golden glow over the library's ancient books. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, the sound filling the room with a sense of comfort, of familiarity. And yet, beneath the calm, something deeper lingered, the weight of history, the weight of time. Miss Marple moved to the bookshelves, her fingers lightly grazing the spines of the books, almost as if she were saying goodbye to them. The legacy of the manor, she knew, was not just in the things that were hidden, but in the stories that had been passed down through generations. Stories of ambition, betrayal, love, and loss. Stories of those who had come before and those who had yet to come. St. Eloise Manor has held its secrets for so long, Miss Marple said softly, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of years of experience. But secrets cannot remain hidden forever. Eventually they must come to light, and when they do, They change the way we see the world. They change the way we see ourselves. Eleanor listened, her mind racing with the implications of Miss Marple's words. The manor was not just a house, not just a collection of bricks and mortar. It was a living thing, a reflection of the people who had shaped it, a record of their lives, their choices, and their mistakes. Miss Marple turned back to her, her eyes sharp. The legacy of the manor is not just in the mysteries we have uncovered, Eleanor. It is in the way we choose to understand them, the way we choose to carry them forward. Eleanor stood still, the weight of Miss Marple's words settling around her like a comforting cloak. She had always believed that the past was something to be left behind. But now, as she stood in the quiet, lingering presence of the manor, she realized that the past was not something to be forgotten. It was something to be remembered. The quiet of the library was punctuated only by the soft rustle of pages as Miss Marple opened the book once more. Her eyes scanned the text, her fingers tracing the delicate writing as though seeking something more, something that had not yet been revealed. For a moment, the silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the quiet hum of the manor itself. And then, with a small smile, Miss Marple looked up. "There it is," she said softly. "The final piece. The final truth." Eleanor stepped closer, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Miss Marple held the book out to her, her fingers resting lightly on the pages. "The truth, Eleanor, is that this manor will never truly be finished. It will live on in the hearts and minds of those who remember it, and it is our job to ensure that the stories it holds are told." Eleanor took the book from her hands, feeling its weight settle in her palms. The truth of the manor, the legacy of those who had come before them, was now in her hands. It was up to her to share it, to ensure that the stories of St. Eloise Manor would not be forgotten. As the first light of morning broke over the horizon, a soft warmth filled the room, chasing away the chill of the night. The whispers that had once filled the manor seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a quiet, soothing stillness. Miss Marple stood at the edge of the library, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her mind still racing with thoughts of the manor's legacy. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Eleanor felt a sense of peace settle over her. The mystery had been solved, yes, but more than that, the history of St. Eloise Manor had been revealed. The stories it held, the lives it had shaped, were no longer secrets. They were now part of the world, waiting to be shared with anyone willing to listen. As Miss Marple turned back to face her, her expression serene, she spoke the final words that would bring the mystery to a close. "Some stories, Eleanor," she said, her voice as steady and calm as ever, "are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be remembered." Chapter 10. A quiet resolution. The soft glow of the morning sun filtered through the ancient windows of St. Eloise Manor, casting a warm golden light across the library. The air was crisp, but the warmth of the new day brought with it a sense of calm, a momentary peace after the storm of revelations that had swept through the manor. The fire in the hearth crackled gently, the sound almost as soothing as a lullaby. Miss Marple stood by the window, gazing out at the sprawling estate that lay beyond, her fingers gently tracing the rim of her teacup. Eleanor, though still processing the enormity of what they had uncovered, stood nearby. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but she could feel the tension in her body begin to ease. The answers they had sought, The mysteries that had plagued the manor for centuries were now resolved. The secret of St. Eloise Manor had been revealed, not just to them, but to the world. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the crackling of the fire, the distant call of birds outside, and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock that stood in the corner, marking time as it always had. The weight of the manor's legacy, its history, seemed to settle quietly into the space around them. Miss Marple took a slow sip from her cup and turned to Eleanor. There was no rush in her movements, no need to hurry. The mystery had unfolded as it was meant to, and now there was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the answers were within reach. "Well, Eleanor," Miss Marple said softly, her voice as soothing as ever, "we have unlocked the secrets of the manor, and now it is time for them to be shared." Eleanor, still absorbing the magnitude of the situation, nodded. Her gaze drifted toward the desk where the book lay, the one that had started it all. The book had revealed everything about the manor, its history and its legacy. It had told the stories of the people who had once lived here, their choices, their ambitions, and the shadows they had left behind. The hidden room, the symbol, the whispers, they were all pieces of a larger puzzle. And now that puzzle was complete. "But Miss Marple," Eleanor said, her voice uncertain, "what do we do now? The mystery is solved, but it feels like there's still something left unsaid, something unfinished." Miss Marple's gaze softened and she placed her teacup down on the table with a quiet clink. She moved over to the desk and gently ran her fingers over the book, her eyes thoughtful. "You are right, Eleanor. A mystery can never truly be finished, not entirely. It lives on in the stories we tell, in the memories we keep. This manor, its legacy, is not something that ends here. It is something that will continue through the telling." She paused, looking back at Eleanor with that knowing glint in her eye. "But that is not for us to carry alone. The secret of St. Eloise Manor is not just for you or me. It is for anyone who is willing to listen. It is for the world to understand in its own time, in its own way." Eleanor took a deep breath, the weight of Miss Marple's words settling into her chest. The mystery had always felt like it was something that belonged to them, something that was just theirs to uncover. But now, as Miss Marple spoke, Eleanor understood. The manor's secrets, the story they had unravelled, were not meant to be kept locked away. They were meant to be shared, passed down, remembered. The room grew quieter as the realization settled over them both. The answers had been found, but there would always be more questions. The manor had lived for centuries, holding its secrets close, but now the truth was free. It was no longer buried beneath the weight of time. Miss Marple turned back toward the window, her eyes gazing out at the lush grounds of the manor. The soft light of the morning illuminated the trees, the gardens, the stone pathways that wound their way through the estate. The manor was still the same, and yet it felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the weight of the past had been lifted. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said softly, her voice distant, "it is time for the manor to rest. The story is complete, and its legacy has been revealed. But the people who lived here, who shaped it, will remain with us. Their choices, their lives, will live on through the stories we tell, through the memory of this place." Eleanor joined her at the window, gazing out at the manor and its grounds. It was true. The manor had changed, but it had not changed in the way she expected. It wasn't the hidden rooms or the secret passages that had made St. Eloise Manor special. It was the lives that had passed through its doors, the people who had come and gone, leaving behind their mark on the house, on the very fabric of its history. Miss Marple looked at Eleanor, her eyes kind but firm. "We are only the caretakers of these stories, Eleanor. We are only the keepers of the secrets that others have left behind. The true power lies in the stories themselves. And now that the story of St. Eloise Manor has been told, it will continue to shape the world, even after we are gone." Eleanor nodded, her heart heavy but peaceful. The mystery had been solved, yes, but the story would live on. It would echo through the halls of the manor, through the lives of those who came to know it. And now it was time for her to share it, to carry it forward. Miss Marple turned back to the desk and closed the book gently, as though laying it to rest. "It is finished, Eleanor," she said softly, "but it will never be truly complete. Not as long as there are people who are willing to listen." Eleanor's eyes met Miss Marple's, and for the first time she felt a sense of peace. The weight of the mystery had been lifted, but the truth was not heavy. It was light, like the quiet morning air that filled the room. The manor had shared its secrets, and now it was time for them to be passed on. The legacy of St. Eloise Manor was not something to be feared. It was something to be celebrated. As Miss Marple took a final sip from her teacup, Eleanor felt the last lingering threads of tension slip away. The story had been told, and now they could move forward. The secrets of the manor were no longer secrets. They were memories. They were history. And in that quiet moment, Miss Marple smiled, a small, satisfied smile, as if she too could feel the peaceful resolution settle over the manor, over its past, over its legacy. St. Eloise Manor had shared its truth, and now it was free.